Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And today's, we're going to be going over some ground DPS builds. So that those of you all that get stuck in some random TFOs in ground combat can more easily succeed in your endeavors there. In this video, I'll be going over a lot of the decent kit modules and kit frames, in my opinion, of how ground combat probably should be played, along with some decent equipment, traits, and devices. And then I'll be going into a couple of DPS setups based upon the 3 different professions, as well as some melee type builds. And then we'll also dive into 2 Sompek ground builds that have been listed on the DPS League's website. Feel free to see the time links in the description for all this stuff in this video. Before I even get into this video though, I do need to mention that I am a tank/healer player in most video games out there, and this is a DPS ground builds video. I'm only doing this video because a lot of you have been asking for something like this, and the fact that my tank/healer builds happen to do a lot more damage than a lot of the DPS builds that many of the players in this game end up doing, which is sad. I want all of y'all that want to do DPS to be able to out DPS my tank builds. I really want that. So I'm giving some basics of how to do so in this video. This is more of a starting point for discussion. This is not the end-all be-all, here are the absolute best builds to do ground combat. No, this is definitely not the case. I'm not a DPS player. There is going to be many different ways to do it. This is just a way if you have no idea where to really begin when it comes to ground combat. So to start off with, we'll be talking about kit modules first. And to start off with, we'll be talking about science ones first. And these are a couple of the ones that I feel are the strongest. As was noted in my last video a few months ago, talking about some science tanking builds in ground combat. Exothermic induction field does have a weakness against the Tholians in that it happens to actually heal them instead of do damage against them. The most universally good induction field in the game is endothermic induction field, which is available from the winter event, which will be coming up in just a couple of weeks. So if you're a science captain, that's probably a kit module that you want to earn inside of the game. It does an AoE slow and freeze zone alongside its AoE damage, which is pretty nice. Cold fusion flash and seismic agitation field are still very strong science AoE abilities. There are a couple of science heals in the game as well that I've listed here. There is a bazillion amount of different pulse type kit modules in the game that have some sort of interrupt. That's nice to have. I didn't include in any of the DPS builds in this video, but they are something to consider if you're thinking about having a lot more universally good builds for science. I also have included the anti-time entanglement field from the Temporal Rep, just because it's another nice AoE sciencey damaging ability. When it comes to engineering, the way that engineering works, unlike science that it's just you spam all of your science abilities and you do lots of damage, engineers have to think a lot more carefully about where they are using their particular kit module abilities. And frankly, in order for their mind barriers, the various types of mind barriers that they decide to use, in order for them to do the maximum damage, they have to understand how the various TFOs in ground combat that they're actually playing are actually going to play out. Which frankly means in ground combat that the engineering profession is actually the hardest of the 3 ground professions to actually execute extremely well. Now you still could do the brain dead approach of just placing turrets and mortars and a shield generator and a medical generator, and you'll still do okay. But if you actually want to compete and actually out DPS tactical officers, which is possible by the way in a couple of ground maps, you have to use mind barriers. It's just the only way to do it. Sabotage is still an extremely strong engineering kit module, and because the expensive sabotages are for training bridge officers, and since engineering is relatively unpopular, especially in ground combat, the sabotage kit modules for captains is actually fairly inexpensive on the exchange. It's quite often under 300,000 energy credits, which when we're considering most of these kit modules, it's actually quite cheap. There's a lot of different types of mortars in the game as well, which are very nice to have, especially if you get into a TFO and there's an enemy that spawns in the floor, in the ceiling, or inside of the walls. mortars are able to easily get to those enemies. It doesn't happen that often in TFOs. It more often happens in missions, just because missions don't have as much Q&A love as the missions do and such. So it's just the way it is. More of those errors happen in missions, and so you can just have bridge officers supplement it. But there are a couple of TFOs and missions or group missions with players that it's nice to have an engineer, especially Assault on Terra Canor Elite, the ground version of the Assault on Terra Canor missions, as well as the colony defense simulation. You basically need an engineer for every single one of those areas that you're defending, thanks to the stuff that engineers can provide. So they're very valuable in those particular circumstances. They're also valuable in Arena of Sompek, thanks to the bioharmonic emitter. The way that Sompek works is that healing starts to become less and less effective, to the point that beyond around 100-ish, passive regeneration and healing to your health pool no longer works. And so temporary HP is kind of the next best thing, frankly, for Sompek, and engineers can provide that the easiest. There's a couple different types of turret fabrications as well. There's also some drones that engineers can get as well. Explosive drones are generally the best types of drones that engineers can get, which those are fortunately only available from the exchange, so our budget engineering build will not have that. Now, when it comes to tactical modules, a vast majority of them do have some sort of way to enhance your damage. Tactical is basically all about doing damage, so that makes sense, right? These are the ones that stuck out to me the most. There probably are many other ones that could easily be better or situationally better. These ones that overall just seem better to me. Motivation seemed really strong just because it's a damage kit module, plus it allows you to heal on crits, since tactical is the profession that crits the most, just the way that it is. Something that can motivate you to build more crit heavy is definitely nice. Rally Cry is the one really good craftable kit module for tactical. It gives you a team-wide additional enhancement to critical chance and critical severity. Trajectory bending isn't necessarily good, except for the fact that most of you that are especially watching this video, you probably build just for space DPS instead of ground DPS, and so most of you probably have intelligence as your primary, which is not what you really should be doing for ground combat. But since you're probably going to have that anyway as your primary, and you're all about trying to do flanking anyway, because that specialization is really good for capitalizing on flanking damage, trajectory bending can help have that specialization at least do something in ground combat a little bit more for you, and allowing it so that at least for a little bit of the time that your attacks can flank regardless of what position you have around the enemy that you are attacking, which definitely should enhance your DPS output, especially if you don't have a decent or that good of a ground build. Graviton Spike is a nice control ability. Biotech Siphon is a really nice ability to help with melee damage, in that it allows you to have a heal whenever you are attacking with melee about half the time, which is nice. Deadly Intent makes it so that you can have the secondary firing mode of your weapons up more often. So for instance, the Tommy Gun, which is a really good AoE physical damage or kinetic damage ability against the Borg. Its primary mode is complete garbage, frankly, but its secondary mode is really good. If you want to use that against the Borg, Deadly Intent can be really good to make sure that you can have that secondary firing mode up a lot more often to fight the Borg. Overwatch and Ambush are okay, but not great. Same thing with Polar One Bombardment and Containment Field. Now, for the specializations themselves, the two kit modules that are leaps and bounds above all of the other ones is Return Fire and Paradox Bomb. They're ones that basically any profession can use and will find great value in it. Paradox Bomb gives you insane control on the battlefield. Science officers will find a lot of damage from this as well. Return Fire is extremely good in that it gives damage to everything that you do. Additionally, it also enhances the recharge speed of your kit module abilities based upon how low of health that you actually are. makes it really good in reading of Sompek, and it also makes it really good in a lot of your ground missions, especially if you aren't very good at ground combat and you're going down a whole bunch. This allows us so that as you're getting closer to 0 HP, that your kit modules start to recharge faster and faster, so that you can get those damaging abilities off more often, so that you can ideally defeat the enemy before you go down yourself. There's a couple of other ones that are decent here as well. Frictionless Particle Grenade will be one that I use for my budget science build in this video. Coordinated Diffusion is a decent one as well. Strategic Analysis and Take Cover adds some additional team-wide healing and extra damage that escalates during combat. Not necessarily great for yourself, but it will be a decent option to enhance the rest of your team if that's what you want to go for. This is a DPS build, so those won't be in the build themselves, but they're definitely something that's nice to have if someone else wants to take those. All in all, a lot of the gold and the money making for Cryptic comes down to the universal kit modules, in that most of the money that Cryptic makes from ground is from these things right here, as well as the ground traits. Phasic Shroud and Agony Field Generator are by and large the best here. Phasic Shroud is ridiculously good in PvP as well as in Sompek. It's also just a relatively all-around decent survival ability in general PvE for ground as well. It gives you an insane temporary HP as well as really high dodge chance and temporary stealth, which is really nice. Agony Field Generator is the current king, or one of the kings for kit modules that do a lot of damage. It also makes phaser damage do more damage from those phaser type weapons, so you'll see a phaser weapon later on suggested that you might want to use instead of the Herald Anti-Projectile Field Projector or Boolean Cannon. The Ecopablo Drone is a drone that's usable by all professions. That's actually really good. The Stabilized Folded Space Transporter is really, it's used a lot in PvP, as well as something that I highly suggest for melee builds. The Crystal Prism from that future TFO event turns out to be a decently good thing for spammable turrets, that whenever you link them together and they're close together, they end up doing a lot more damage overall. The Aimbrush Turret Fabrication have a lot more punch, but they last a lot less for their lifespan. They generally last around 10 to 15 seconds-ish, and then they just spurt out and die. The Crystalline Spike from the Phoenix Prize Packs, it's a crystal that you place that taunts enemies for a little bit, absorbs their damage, and then after a few seconds, or after it gets to its threshold for damage absorption, it explodes and releases that damage in an AoE fashion. Gravitational Juncture is a nice one as well. And then the two universal kit modules from the Discovery Reputation, Mud's Time Device and the Gravity Containment Unit, are both pretty decent as well. Mud's Time Device is pretty similar to, what's it called? To Return Fire over here. And Gravity Containment Unit is decent for science builds as well as for melee builds to get enemies closer to you so you can attack them more. Now, for our next part, we'll talk about equipment. To start off with, we'll be going over two different sets that I feel are really, really important to put right off the bat. First off is the Romulan Imperial Navy two-piece, just because it's a set that actually uses your kit frame, which is really, really rare inside of this game. It also enhances plasma damage. And the armor is a generally well-rounded armor that additionally, with the two-piece, gives you an additional 30% crit severity whenever you are crouching. Additionally, with the standard Not Cool Temporal Operative two-piece, which is also from a mission, the Temporal Front, the shield is a really, really strong survival shield that we will use in most of the builds in this video. And then the two-piece with its weapon gives you an additional passive for 30% critical severity and 2% critical chance. You add those two mission sets together, and whenever you are crouching, you get an additional 60% critical severity in ground combat, which is not trivial. That is very substantial. And then for your weapon slot that you'll actually be using for weapon damage, just add a plasma range weapon in there, either a split beam, a pulse wave, or a wide beam pistol. Is generally the best things to put there, at least from in my experience. There might be something else that I'm overlooking in terms of plasma weapons that you might want to put there instead. When it comes to kit frames themselves, here are my recommendations for 6 different types of kit frames you might want to consider. The Herald kit frames and the Delta Expedition kit frames are, from what I can tell, generally the best weapon-based damage kit frames in the game. I'm not 100% sure as to which one of these kit frames is actually inherently better. My gut feeling is that the Delta Expedition is better, but the raw damage from Herald might be better instead. In my example builds in this video, we're going to be using the Delta Expedition for the examples for the higher end builds. But if the Herald one actually ends up being better, then just you use that one instead. These indie kit frames, because they give you additional exposed chance or exposed damage or exposed duration, exposed and exploit mechanics inside this game only really matters for melee builds. So the Zenny kit frame is probably going to be one of your best options for raw damage from a kit frame. The Royal Imperial Navy is what we would call the just budget kit frame. It's for a mission, great for plasma builds. It's pretty much a Herald kit frame that's just for plasma only. The Terran Empire kit frame gives you additional control duration on your control kit module abilities, which makes this exceptionally useful for science captains. So my recommendation is, if you're going to be a science captain doing science magic stuff in ground combat, use the Terran Empire kit frame. They're also generally cheap on the exchange because for some reason a lot of people don't realize how strong this kit frame actually is for science captains. I'm not particularly sure why. In my mind, just thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense. But anyway, another option is you can go to your fleet and get the versatile kit frames. If you're a tactical or engineering captain, go and choose the vascular regenerator version. The vascular regenerator is a pretty nice heal over time that also cleanses debuffs. If you're a science captain, I recommend you choosing shield recharge or rally cry to give some extra survival or some extra damage. As for armors, here's a couple of general armors from the low buy store. The Herald armor is a pretty good weapon-based DPS armor. My gut feeling was that the Advanced Fleet Recoil one was better for weapon-based armor, but I, again, could easily be wrong. The Herald one might just inherently be better. If that's the case, in my higher end or slightly better DPS ground builds in this video, just replace the Advanced Fleet Recoil armor with the Herald armor and it'll be a better build for you. The Undying Bile armor is the best armor in the game for passive health regeneration, which is good in every map besides Arena of Sompek. The Heroic armor has a toggleable ability to basically have true sight in ground combat, which is a very hard counter to what a lot of PvP players do in ground combat, which they do a lot of cloaking and try to sneak up on you and one-shot you. If you have the Heroic armor, the enemy can't do that to you. So that's really, really nice to have. The 23rd Century Experimental Environmental Suit is one of the best armors, if not the best armor for science builds inside the game. The Omega armor is a pretty strong armor as well, with a 3-piece bonus for extra team-wide dodge chance. In the olden days for Sompek, when the Arena of Sompek first came into the game, most players that did pre-made groups try to get a pre-made group of 5, with all 5 of them using the Omega Task Force armor, so that there would be a stacking amount of dodge chance across the entire team, so that you could dodge a lot more of the hazards that were going on inside of the arena to be able to survive a lot longer. The Discovery Legends 3-piece, well, the Discovery armor itself is actually a pretty good DPS armor for what I've been able to tell on STO builds. The 3-piece set is definitely geared towards melee DPS. If you're going to do a melee DPS captain, the Discovery Legends 3-piece is basically the way you should be going. And if you want to do a melee damage type thing that's not punching, then you'll use your secondary weapon for whatever type of melee weapon you actually want to use. And then you should be doing pretty well there. The Iconian Resistance armor is generally considered one of the best survival armors inside of the game. It gives you some inherent extra HP off of the armor. It's got a nice passive that's really unique to it that we'll talk about in the Sompek builds at the end of this video. And then the 2-piece also gives you some extra HP as well. The Temporal Defense armor is basically the budget version of the 23rd Century Experimental EV suit. That's not an EV suit, so you'll have to use something else if you want to do Nuclear Prime Transmittal Tactics as a science captain. When it comes to the low-buy store, over here on the left are the 3 weapons that seem to be the most prominent in a lot of the DPS runs for ground builds inside of the game. The Boolean Assault Cannon and the Advanced Herald Antiproton Beam Projector have been namestays for a very long time, so I don't think they really need a lot of explanation there. The newcomer is the Discovery Phaser Full Auto Rifle. When I covered this in my low-buy store video, this weapon was not really that strong. With the Discovery expansions that have come up over the past year, they have buffed this a decent amount, as well as the cooldown on its secondary fire, so that it actually is competitive to the other 2. It's probably not 100% where the other 2 are, but whenever you use this combined with the Agony Field Generator, which gives a damage resistance rating debuff to enemies that it hits, it makes this weapon do more damage, and so at least whenever you use it with this kit module, at least it feels like it's doing as much damage as the other 2. Outside of those strong ones from the low-buy store, having a Plaza weapon, just from random drop, crafting, realm of reputation, lithium store, something like that. To supplement the other budget mission 2-piece sets that I've mentioned previously is also a pretty good option. For some kinetic and physical damage, the Mind Meld device for doing damage with the fist is a nice way to go. You can also use the TR-116B sniper rifle for ranged kinetic damage, or the Zephyr Cochrane shotgun from Phoenix prize packs for a ranged AoE kinetic damage that's a little bit more designed to be closer to the enemy, but you still don't have to be fully in melee. When it comes to personal traits, here are the ones that seem to be the most prominent for a lot of the DPS builds that I've been able to find over the past 6 to 8 months or so for ground builds. Adrenal Release takes the cake though. It gives you an extra 50% damage for the cost of losing 100 damage resistance rating on your captain, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but you are going to feel it. Vicious and Hive Mind gives you stacking extra damage. Vicious is during combat. Hive Mind depends upon how many allies there are near you, and that bonus is doubled if someone else also has Hive Mind in your group as well. Brutal Impetus gives you more damage when you or an ally defeats an enemy, which is nice. Those are decent as well. Strike Team Specialist is basically a must-have to use if you're a tactical captain. Field Researcher is basically a must-have to use if you're a science captain doing science wizardy stuff in ground combat. And then Soldier, Lucky Technician, and Creative are also decent filler traits if you have those available on your captain as well. For melee combat, Brawler and Physical Strength are definitely the way to go. Some species don't have Physical Strength available to them because they're already inherent in some fashion in their species trait. Berserker gives you extra damage as well when you have enemies near you. Pack Leader increases exposed chance, which again, expose and exploit mechanics only really matter to melee combat nowadays. Same thing with Covert in that your exploits deal more damage. As for some extra stuff for Sompek, for those of y'all that are wanting to make a build specifically for Sompek, I highly recommend first off getting Immunity Response and Imminent Danger. Immunity Response makes it so that you can just, while it's toggled, to ignore all DOTs, all damage over times in the arena, which is really nice. And also, the con is that you don't all healing is disabled and all passive regeneration is also disabled. But if you consider that in the arena of Sompek, that's what you're building up to anyway, and that after around 100 or so, healing is basically disabled and that passive regeneration is basically disabled anyway. The cons to this trait is basically nullified anyway. So it's just the pros that you're going to be left with for this trait in the later portions and in rounds of Arena of Sompek. Imminent Danger, again, because you can't really heal, there's a good chance you'll be below 25% HP a lot of the fights and in a lot of the rounds, so you get extra dodge for like 10% of the time in the later rounds if you have this trait on. And then Conduit is really nice because to survive through much of the later rounds, you do need to use a lot of consumables, ideally to survive through it. and Conduit just gives you extra bonuses for those consumables that you might be using. As for reputation traits, I'm not really going to go into the exact stuff for this, just that the stuff on the left is stuff that in one way or another very clearly gives you extra damage in some fashion. The stuff on the right is stuff that you all could probably use if you wanted to add some extra survivability or utility to your particular ground build. When it comes to devices, here are the ones that I consider the most prominent and strong. There probably are other ones in the game, but these are the ones that just came to mind to me the most, and the quickest. Paradox Corrector is from mission replays during the featured episode replays. They haven't happened in a super long time, since prior to Victory's Life. We haven't had one since before Victory's Life came out, so it's all the Geminar captains have never had access to this thing. None of the Discovery era Federation captains have ever had access to this either, so it is pretty unfortunate. It is a team-wide 50% HP heal that can also revive team members that have been defeated, and can also be used after you've been defeated as well, which is pretty nice. The gambling device off the exchange is the best triple type buff in the game. If you're unlucky, it gives you negative crit chance and crit severity and dodge for a minute whenever you're lucky. It gives you extra crit chance, crit severity, and dodge for an hour. So if you try this a couple times before a TFO starts, you'll probably be able to get the gambling device to work in your favor, and then have it going throughout most of your time in a ground TFO. Catch So White is the best consumable in the game, but you have to be a Geminar or Geminar Vanguard in order to be able to use it. It's a buff that lasts 5 minutes, and it gives you an extra 10% damage for all damage sources, an extra 20% maximum HP, and an additional 25% run speed. It also allows you to use your Shroud if you haven't finished the full Victory's Life arc as a Geminar captain. After you complete that arc, you don't have to use Catch So White to continue to use your cloak. But if you're too lazy to finish that arc and you want to use Catch So White to make sure that that's still all good for you, then you're more than welcome to do that too. Frosted Boots are also pretty nice as well. They light on really fast. They're earned from the winter event, which is coming up pretty soon as well. And the downside is that it reduces traction, which in most of your ground TFOs is not really going to be an issue. So you basically get the pros of it, and since there's really not a lot of edges to fall off and die in most of the ground TFOs, it's not really much of an issue. Here's some other stuff on the right with some frequency modulators available to you, some combat pets and consumables that seem to be more prominent in a lot of builds that I've seen. There's probably other stuff as well that I'm overlooking as well. And lastly, we'll be going into the raw DPS setups themselves. I'll be doing a budget and non-budget version of the 3 different professions, a version for science and tactical, and then what the DPS League says is the best for Sompek for engineering and for tactical. And for those last 2 builds, I pulled directly from the DPS League site itself. The link for that is also in the description as well. Now, when it comes down to this, the budget version of Science, we're using the Fleet Science Kit frame with shield recharge. We're using the Temporal Defense Reputations combat armor, as well as the Temporal Defense's dual pistols. You could still use the Romulan missions armor and kit module if you wanted, but with the sciencey types of things that we're doing with Science and wizardy things, it doesn't really help you that much, frankly. So this ends up being a little bit better. You definitely could use the others in the meantime to bridge to get to these, for sure. No problems there. And most of these end up being from a lot of the specializations, because most of these stronger science stuff ends up being from other sources. But we'll be using Return Fire because it gives you damage and it helps with get module cooldowns, so you can spam your other stuff more. Then we have things like Exothermic Induction Field, Frictionless Particle Grenade, Paradox Bomb, and Anti-Time Entanglement Field to help out with some of that damage. We are using the Uncool 2-piece just to help with some extra crit severity, because I couldn't think of anything else better to put in the weapon slots. Science doesn't necessarily need to use weapons as much for their damage as other professions really should. So Science has that advantage going for them. It's also why Science is kind of one of those ones that, once you know what kit modules you want to use, ideally it's one of the most straightforward professions for ground combat in the entire game. You click your AoE damage buttons, and the enemy just melts and goes away. The little bit better version, where you're going to be using the Terran Empire Sciences kit frame to have some additional duration on all of our control abilities. Basically, all of our kit modules do some sort of control, so the kit frame is basically going to be enhancing all those effects for us. Seismic agitation field, cold fusion flash, and endothermic induction field are pretty standards for a lot of Science DPS builds. And then we can round it out with Paradox Bomb for a nice pull to keep them in there, and anti-simultaneous field to capitalize on that Paradox Bomb pull to have an insane amount of damage over time going on during all those things at once. We are using the whatever faction that you have of the 23rd century experimental environmental suit, whether that's Federation, Klingon, Roman Republic. Doesn't matter too much, it's just a slightly different look, but it's the same stats. We are still using the not cool shield and weapon. And then for the actual weapon that we'll be using, I decided just to put in the Herald beam projector because, well, it's a decent one and it's fine. There probably are better weapons that you could use the cycle between firing and using your kit modules, so you'll potentially be able to use them both at about the same time. I'm not someone who's going to experiment enough in ground combat to be able to tell you what's the most fluid of all weapons to do so. There probably are people in the game that have figured that out already, but it just wasn't really apparent to me when I was searching for making this video. If you do know where to find that stuff, just leave a link in the description, and so that everyone can see it. Now, when it comes to engineering, engineering is a bit less straightforward in terms of a damage type build than what Science is. Science is like, alright, let's put in a whole bunch of AoE damage abilities, and I click them, and I win. Engineering, to get the maximum DPS, especially in queues like Bug Hunt Elite, what you have to unfortunately do is learn the maps themselves and learn where enemies are going to spawn. It's the same concept as like in space, in that if you're going to be doing a mine-oriented build in space combat, you have to learn where enemies are going to spawn and start to mine basically where those spawn points are. And so the various types of mine barriers in the game are probably going to be where your highest amount of damage per second is going to come from. There are other options, of course. There's mortars, turrets, other types of things too. You can use weapons to supplement that as well. Mine barriers is where you're going to get your most of your damage, though, unfortunately. In terms of mine barriers, the cheapest epic one comes from the Gamma Reputation. You get a cloaked mine barrier from there. There's also the Neutroc mortar from Delta Rep. You can just craft a beam turret or get one from random drops. And you can also find a nano medical generator from the Undine Reputation. This medical generator, unfortunately, is not as good as most of the ultra rare medical generators in the game. This medical generator is only the most ideal if you're fighting the Undine or you're fighting the bugs in Bug Hunt Elite. Outside of those particular two circumstances, you're better off using an ultra rare medical generator instead. And then for this build, we'll be rounding it out with Return Fire for some extra damage and extra kit module cooldowns to help get these things off of cooldown faster. For our budget stuff themselves, we'll be using the Ramen Imperial Navy two-piece of the kit module, or the kit frame and the armor, for that extra 30% crit severity whenever you're crouched. The not cool two-piece of the shield and the weapon, for some extra passive crit severity inherently, plus a plasma split beam rifle to help with damage, because the kit frames already give you an extra 20% plasma damage anyway. As for the slightly better version, we're using the Delta Expedition kit frame. If the Herald kit frame is better, then use that one instead. We're still keeping most of these the same. The differences in here is that we're making sure that the beam turret and medical generator are both at ultra rare. You can't get these to epic because they are crafted / fleet kit modules. If a kit module is crafted or it's from the fleet, you can only get those kit modules to ultra rare. If it is a kit module from reputations or from the exchange / lockboxes, then you inherently start them off at epic rarity, and then you're just leveling up the mark of the actual kit module itself. It's really weird, but that's just the way this game works right now. So yeah, for both these, we want these at ultra rare. The ultra rare version of the beam turret gives it a flamethrower of ability whenever enemies get close to it, which is really nice for making it last longer. The medical generator at ultra rare makes it heal a lot more, frankly, than what the Undine one is going to do. So that's something to think about. And for the fifth one, I decided to just put in an explosive drone that's available off of the exchange. That is one of the best drones available inside the game, and it's only available to engineers, so I felt that was pretty good. In terms of the armor and weapon, we switched out the plasma weapon with the Boolean assault cannon, and we switched out the Romulan armor with the advanced fleet recoil compensated armor. If the Herald armor from the low-buy store is better, then use the Herald tactical armor from the low-buy store. Now for a tactical budget build, we're doing the same thing that we did for engineering. Now we were used in the Romulan Imperial Navy tactical kit frame and the armor for that 2-piece crit severity when crouched. We're still using the not cool 2-piece for extra crit severity just passively, and the plasma slipping rifle to synergize with that extra plasma weapon enhancement from the Romulan tactical kit frame. In terms of the kit modules themselves, there's probably other ones we could have chosen instead that might be better for damage. I thought these ones were still sufficient though. Rally Cry gives a team-wide enhancement to crit severity and critical chance. Overwatch gives you an extra chance to expose. Not super important, but it's nice. Ambush gives you a nice strong single attack to help take down bigger enemies easier. Battle Strategist gives you extra damage and a chance to expose as well. I think Contain Fill is just a nice hold and damage AoE thing to help contain enemies a little bit easier. The little bit better one for tactical DPS, this is what I came up with. The Delta Expedition Tactical Frame. So what I chose here. If the Herald one's better, then use the Herald one. Just like if the Herald armor is better, then use the Herald armor here. For the kit modules, the only one that stayed here was Rally Cry. The rest of these have been replaced by something else. Motivation I've put here just because it gives you extra damage, plus you get to heal on crits. Tactical typically crits the most of all the professions in the game, so hey, you get some extra heals off of those crits for building right. Trajectory Bending, the reason why we have this here, it's not because it's the best kit module in the game, but for a lot of you that do space DPS, many of you have the intelligence specialization as your primary specialization, so that you can capitalize much more on a lot of the flanking angles of enemies in space combat. And since you're probably random into a ground TFO, you're like, man, I can't use my intelligence specialization as much. If you have trajectory bending, you don't have to worry about your positioning. You automatically, for a couple of seconds, get automatic flanking damage. There's also a kit module that you get automatic crits whenever you're flanking enemies for a while that you could also synergize with this too if you wanted. That's totally up to you. For this build, I just have that combined with Graviton Spike for a nice AoE control. That's through your weapon. And then we're adding in the Agony Field Generator because that's just a really strong, overpowered kit module. And because we're using the Agony Field Generator in this, we might as well add in the Phaser Full Auto Rifle from the low-buy store, because it'll do more damage because we have this thing in our kit modules. Now, when it comes to melee damage, there's just different ways to go. You can go with science or you can go with tactical. Do not go with engineering. There's no synergies whatsoever with engineering kit modules, but science and tactical both have their ways to do extra damage. Now, when it comes to the ground build itself, I recommend the Discovery Legends ground 3-piece. The Burnham armor is actually pretty good for damage. The shield gives you extra melee damage and run speed whenever your shields are not at full. So whenever you're taking damage, that's basically going to give you extra damage for that. And then the Mind Meld device allows for punching to be really good. Instead of a knockdown button 3, it's an engage instead, so you can go and attack enemies and get up in their face a lot easier as well. It also has a finisher. If you take out an enemy, you're able to heal for a substantial amount as well, which again is good in every queue besides Arena of Sompek. To round this out, because we're doing a lot of stuff that's already going to be unadaptable versus the Borg anyway, I felt that it'll be good just to use a TR-116B sniper rifle for these builds, just because there are some cues, like especially in the Borg TFOs in ground combat, that you end up fighting a boss at the end of a long map that is over some toxic ground, so that if you try to engage with them in melee combat, you're going to die within a few seconds because of that toxic ground itself, which kind of makes it suck, honestly. So because of that downside and that you can't do melee combat at 100% in all of the ground TFOs, you ideally should have some sort of ranged weapon to compensate for that, so you are still useful in those moments in those TFOs. As for the kit modules themselves, I recommend the Zindi kit frame. You're able to get more exposes or more exposed damage, depending about how good you are at getting exposes. I additionally highly recommend, for both versions of Melee, to have the stabilized folded space transporter. The reason is because, again, there are some enemies that, because of the way the map is designed, you aren't supposed to be able to get up in their face, in terms of the enemies that you're supposed to defeat. However, if you use a stabilized folded space transporter, you're able to get up there. One of the most notable examples of this is Assault on Terrak Nor Elite. There are a lot of grenadiers that are up on the second story that are throwing grenades down on you, and normally you just have to use a ranged weapon and shoot at them from the ground. You can use this transporter to teleport up to them, and now you're outside of that AoE radius of their grenades, and now you're able to fight them in melee up there on that second story, which is really fun to be able to do and be like, hi team, I see that you're suffering there on the main story. I'm just up here chilling and taking out these grenadiers, so you don't have to worry about them as much during this TFO. That's what I would highly suggest do in that TFO, but that's just me. Alright, so for other things to add for this, for science in particular, I recommend the Dialovine Drip passive combined with haphazard Dialovine. It's basically the same thing, except these two things stack for some reason, and they both do the same thing. They give you extra melee damage, and they give you extra maximum HP. So basically, for a science melee, what I recommend doing is you're entering combat, pop haphazard Dialovine, and then boom, teleport right to an enemy and start fighting, and you'll have a bunch of extra damage and be able to do a lot of stuff really easily. Now, one of the things that's scary for melee combat, and I'm going to note this right now, whenever you are, if the scariest enemy, if you're doing melee combat, is the Borg. And just so you know, fighting the Borg in advanced difficulty versus elite, there is a vastly huge chasm of difference there. Elite difficulty, not only do the Borg have much higher hit points and do a lot more damage, they are more likely to send Borg assimilation nanites against you to assimilate you. And if you're in melee combat with the Borg, it's a lot easier for them to send those Borg assimilation nanites against you to assimilate you. And the easiest counter to the Borg assimilation is to use a kit module called Vascular Regenerator. If you notice that debuff is on you and the assimilation nanites are about to assimilate you, you can use Vascular Regenerator and cleanse those nanites off of you. Additionally, if they already do start to assimilate you, you can use Biotic Carapace to stop that Borg assimilation that is in progress. In my testing, doing all of this, it feels good. Dialovine Drip and haphazard Dialovine combined with stabilized transporter and stuff with this, it feels good. Now, this might be a bit too safe in terms of its builds. Maybe if you're a lot more adventurous for your melee damage, you might want to replace those bottom two kit modules that are for basically countering Borg assimilation and put in more damage options there instead. You're more welcome to do that. This is just what I feel comfortable with as someone who has used a melee captain before. Same thing goes with tactical. I don't have anything here for borg assimilation. The option would be to replace the Zindi tactical kit frame with a fleet kit frame that has a vassal regenerator kit module built into it to get that option to you. When it comes to melee stuff for tactical, I still would recommend the stabilized transporter combined with biotech siphon so that your melee attacks heal you, which is really nice. Rally cry is super nice because it gives you team-wide crit chance, crit severity. And the other one that's really nice to put in here is motion accelerator. It gives you extra melee damage, and it gives you immediate immunity to movement debuffs. So let's say you get hit by something that is pulling you really, really hard so that you can't move. Pop motion accelerator, and now you can move again and go after that really annoying enemy that tried to hopelessly hold you back from attacking them. I couldn't really think of anything else super better to put in the 5th kit module, so I just put in the standard oldie of sweeping strikes, which is an AoE melee attack. It's not really gonna probably hit a lot more than like 1 or 2 enemies anyway, but it's something that's nice to put there anyway. The ground build, other than that's basically the same from the science one too. All right, for these last 2 builds, they're basically the same. These are ones that I pulled directly off of the DPS League, and these were the types of builds that Filai-san and his group did to get what I believe is the current record on Arena of Sompek. Gained around getting and completing around 1,337, I think is what they got to. They streamed it for a long time, and I think the video might even still be up on Twitch, so feel free to check it out if you so choose. Looking up Sompek ground on the DPS League site can probably get you to that link within a couple of clicks as well. Here's the general build though, and the tactical version of this is basically the same. Because of how Sompek works, by the way, because gradually over time healing and passive generation basically doesn't work, it basically means that you shouldn't really play a science captain if you actually want to try to last in Sompek past round 100. If you want to just get to around 30 to get the fancy emote, you can use any profession and it's fine. Getting past there, well, yeah, you probably should just be using tactical and engineering officers. Tactical because they do a lot of damage, and engineering because they have access to the bioharmonic emitter, which gives you a team-wide temporary HP, which since in Sompek after a while you can't really heal, so it's just temporary HP, dodging, and immunities that you can really use to keep yourself alive. And this is one of the best forms of temporary HP available inside the game. It makes engineering captains quite invaluable to Sompek runs, frankly, inside the game. In terms of the builds themselves, Delta Expedition seems to be one of the best ones for damage. If Herald happens to be better for your particular DPS build, then use the Herald kit frame. Again, for Sompek, even though we're doing damage, the point is survival. The reason why I think the Iconian Resistance Armor was basically used is because of this unique passive right here. Whenever you're below 50% HP, you have complete immunity to stuns, roots, and knockbacks, which is quite valuable, frankly. They still use the not cool personal shield because that's quite a good survival shield, but they didn't use the 2-piece for this for extra crit severity. Instead, they used the Iconian Resistance Pulse Wave for the 2-piece of some extra HP and armor penetration. They're usually using the phaser rifle because they have the Agony Field Generator in their kit modules. They also have Phasic Shroud because this is the wrong description, but Phasic Shroud is basically the best kit module that gives you a ton of temporary HP as well as a lot of dodge chance and temporary stealth as well. So allow you to survive a lot easier. The Akapaba drone system is a nice damaging type drone that's available to all professions, and the Crystal Prism is a nice way to get a lot of spammable type of turrets inside of ground combat. And the tactical version is basically the same, with the difference just being that they have return fire here instead of bioharmonic emitter. to help with get module cooldowns and for some extra damage for themselves. Other than that, it's basically the exact same build, so that one's pretty straightforward. And this build worked in Sompek, so it probably works in most of the other TFOs as well, even though it's quite overpowered for TFOs other than Sompek. You also have to do a lot of coordination in Sompek in order for you to do really well in it, so there's that to also think about as well. And yeah, that's basically it for this video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like this type of content. Also feel free to comment below how you felt about this version of this video for recording. I got a comment a couple of days ago about a potentially easier way to remove some of the static in my videos, and so I am trying that in this video today. So let me know in the comments if you like this type of recording. If you don't, then I'll switch back to my classic ones and just recording directly in PowerPoint instead of using this free OBS software to do so. Anyway, thank you all for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.